Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm your host, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, and I'm joined today by Jasmine Navarro, who is a family and executive wellbeing expert who is known in the region for delivering programs to help employees build confidence and resilience around family wellbeing challenges, as among many other things. Welcome to the show, Jasmine. How are you?
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's jump right in with it's so important to you to be working with both adults, and I know you work with teens as well, but particularly families, particularly employees in relation to kind of the workplace. Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, I think, it does come from my personal story and my professional experience, like when I was going through a difficult and challenging time when I was a teenager, my whole family was affected. It wasn't just me, you know, and of course, maybe how they dealt with things were affecting how I overcame that challenge, but equally my pain was affecting them as well. So I really do believe that and I do believe everything starts at home as well. If you have a happy, functional household, then I think you're going to bring that to school if you're a student, or to the workplace. It's very hard just to switch off, isn't it, when you've got things going on,
Yeah,
especially if you're a child or a parent, we feel everything.
we do, and it's very common, isn't it? Almost for it's particularly the old school mentality of companies wanting people to just leave their personal life at home, and I do
Yes.
understand that to a point. So we need to have some element of focus while we're in the workplace, but it can be really, really tricky to do that when you've got so many things going on. So what are some of like the challenges you've seen with some of the families that you've been working with when it pertains to like maybe parents going back into the workplace when there are challenges at home?
Yeah, well, I think the work that I do with parents also is helping them to support their children, like how they effectively communicate with their children, how they support them if their child is struggling at school, because all of these things, because of course, like you said, how does it affect the parents? Worry. They're just completely worried. And, when you're so consumed with worry and fear and maybe anxiety, it's very hard to concentrate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And maybe you're triggered more with because work can be stressful anyway, but if you have all of these other things that you're carrying, you might not be able to manage the normal days of normal, like everyday stress as well. So it will affect your work. Concentration, I think that's what I've noticed. It really affects their concentration and productivity.
Yeah, and that's obviously like two of the, bits of gold that employers want, right, from their employees. They want them to be able to
Focus. Yeah.
concentrate, they want the focus, and they want the productivity. Um, so what are some of the perhaps things that you've seen from parents that you've been supporting through some of the companies you've been kind of working with to deliver some of your talks? What are some of the things that tend to come up as common themes?
Well, like I was saying, like it depends. Like I go in and I deliver workshops to parents. Maybe one example is supporting tweens and teens on social media. So, you really do see when I'm working with parents, like how worried they are. I know I've just said this, but the anxiety that they have, maybe their child is suffering from anxiety themselves, or maybe being bullied, but then the parents are so worried and anxious as well. So they're responding to their child's anxiety with more anxiety.
Mm.
And, so we really have to deal with that first, helping them become aware of how they're dealing with their pain and their emotions, because of course, how they're dealing with it, the children are learning how to manage their own emotions by watching the parents. So it's all about, helping them become aware and helping them manage their anxiety so they can be a healthy role model for their children. Of course, it all starts with the parents. And, going back to my experience, that's exactly what happened with me, really. Well, there was no communication
Mm.
at home.
Yeah.
So I didn't know how to talk because, if you're not shown at a young age how to deal with these things, you can't just learn from thin air, you know.
Exactly. And I really believe that when we leave kind of the education system and go out into the workplace, not everybody is a self-starter and wants to continue educating themselves, particularly around these
Yeah.
kind of soft skills, even though they're not particularly soft. I think they're some of the hardest skills that we could ever learn. But
Yeah.
when we start to move into the workplace, that can sometimes then be the only other place where we are modeling, right? And we're listening and we're learning from the people around us. So, what do you think workplaces could potentially do to help support parents that maybe isn't happening at the moment?
Well, I think, well, I mean, it is sort of happening at the moment, but definitely needs to be more, giving the parents access to, trainings, so they have a chance to educate themselves on, emotional awareness, effective communication within the family, supporting their children on social media or through school transitions, all of these things that, like I said, we don't just know it, we need to learn it. So giving them access to trainings, I think, because when I've gone into companies and I've given these workshops to parents, it's just a start, it's just an introduction. And of course we need more, more than just 1 hour workshop. It's great, it gives them space to share so they realize they're not alone, but then we need to keep this up. It needs to be a longer term plan.
What does a longer term plan look like?
Well, I think ideally, and like even if it's an hour a week, something like that, I think it has to be continuous, to build the momentum as well, because it does take time for people to open up and realize things. Everybody learns at different stages, different levels, different, we're all different. So I think to give people the chance to really open up trust so they can be able to learn. It takes time, there's no quick fix, but I think building this into their sort of as a habit, so they're used to it as well, and just teaching them basic things. If we don't know it, it's impossible.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because like there's almost this notion that time is so precious, and by putting kind of support elements, sometimes leaders can see that as time away from work and what they should be doing. But actually, if it's clearing the path, right, and clearing the anxiety or emotions or just general wonders that parents likely have, it will free up time, space, cognitive capacity to actually be able to be more productive, right?
Exactly. And that's what it always comes down to. People say, oh, we don't have time for this, but it's like, but it saves you time. It saves you time, because the amount that you process and you learn and you realize, and then you actually see things much clearer, don't you? I mean, yeah, exactly that.
I think there's so many challenges when it comes to potentially supporting families, right, in the workplace, or parents in the workplace, because there's that worry that I think every parent has in the back of their mind, like all the time, whether their kid is actually okay and if they're doing a good job. And there's always kind of that level of narration going on. But there's obviously like the practicality, right, of trying to balance work responsibilities with family life. Sometimes as well, one common thing that I've noticed and seen is that particularly mothers tend to feel a bit of discrimination around being a parent and being in the workplace and having to nip out to do something, or wanting to pause in their career to actually have another child and things like this. There seems to be a whole lot of other things that parents have to be mindful of that perhaps somebody that doesn't have kids would be experiencing. What have you seen on that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point as well. And that can make them feel alone as well, and unable to just manage everything. I mean, I've done workshops as well about, how to avoid parental burnout. And it is these things as well, because they get so overloaded and feel so alone, and there's no support, nobody understands. So again, it's the same thing really that is needed, more trainings, more conversations about this, and to not feel shame, because I think sometimes I've worked with parents who just feel ashamed that they're feeling like they can't cope and they're having difficulties, but they don't want to say anything because they don't want to be judged or anything like that. So I think it's more conversations. But saying that as well, sometimes I've done group workshops and parents, they don't want to open up because, they wonder if they're if they're the only ones feeling like this. So again, it takes time. You know, one workshop is great, but you need to build that trust. You need to build the relationships.
Yeah.
It takes time, you know, not everybody opens up straight away.
Definitely. And also, you know, the people working with their immediate line managers, it's great to have people like yourself that come in and do workshops, but it needs to be ingrained in the culture that these conversations that can happen, to feel comfortable to say, boss, I need to go and do this thing, or have I got any flexibility with this project over here because this part of my life needs this right now, you know, and vice versa. I think it is getting this ability to be able to communicate openly, free from judgment, seems to be a common theme on every podcast episode I've done for this podcast. And it's something that I see happening and evolving. But is there anything that you think that a company or a leader could implement to help ingrain this level of openness that little bit easier?
Well, I think, you know, it always starts from the top, doesn't it? I think they need leaders, whether they're parents or not. Of course, it would help if they were parents, if we're talking about parents, but they need to be, like we always say, open and vulnerable first. They need to show it's okay.
Yep.
But in order to do that, then, you know, they would need access to training and everything as well. Because, you know, you don't just one day you're not open and the next day you're sharing everything. And we're not saying share everything all the time. You know, we need boundaries. I think, you know, boundary setting is a very good workshop as well. You know, learning what is a boundary, how do I communicate boundaries, you know, all of these things, the language I use, you know, even just teaching people these kinds of things with boundaries, that's a life changer, isn't it? Learning to say no when it's too much, or, you know, things like this, simple things. It doesn't have to be very, very personal, especially at the beginning.
So on that then, can you give us an example of a boundary that a parent could use with a leader that is perhaps something common, and then vice versa, a boundary that perhaps a leader needs to enforce?
Well, it's just about, you know, I think it's hard to give examples for other people, but I think because, you know, ultimately it starts with the boundaries you have with yourself. I mean, that's the first one.
Yep.
You know, my boundary that I have with myself might not work with somebody else, you know. So I think, of course, I could share the boundaries I have with myself. You know, when I say no, we all know, and it all starts again. It all starts, as always, as a relationship you have with yourself. You know, we all know if we're connected with ourselves. I mean, that's the first step, isn't it? Being connected and listening to ourselves. That takes time as well. When we're really in tune with ourselves and somebody oversteps our boundaries, we feel it. Like, we do feel it. We think, oh no, this is not right, or I need to say no. And that's when we need to speak up. So it's about speaking up as well. But that's different for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to teach people how to connect with themselves, and then they can set the boundaries. I mean, you can give examples, of course.
I think a clear example that's come through there, that you mentioned a couple of times, is that ability to say no. But I think it is really, really crucial, what you just said there about being able to actually recognize this is my boundary before it gets overstepped. Because most of the time, a lot of people feel like their boundary has been overstepped. They become a bit emotional about that, right? And the way they perhaps don't like, but they don't actually know that what the boundary was that they needed to enforce until it's too late.
Yes, totally, exactly. But if they're being part of conversations where people are talking about this and talking about their experience with boundaries, then that they will learn much faster. You know, because if it's just you by yourself with no support, it can take you years to figure this out. I mean, it took me a long time. I'm just learning now about, you know, how important it is to listen to myself and say no. It took me a long time there, and that's with help.
Yeah.
It's hard to do it by yourself. That's because I didn't have the role models, maybe.
Perhaps.
That's the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But then, having said that, you know, I've worked with a lot of people who have had the almost textbook family upbringing and still
Oh,
struggle
okay.
with boundaries. So I think it's
Oh,
almost like
wow,
an
that's
open
interesting.
playing field for everyone when it comes to boundaries, because I think we live in a world that is fast, but also like technology is making everything faster and more convenient. And we have this like compulsive need to succeed more and more, whether that be getting the promotion, being there for your
Yeah.
kids in certain ways. Like everybody's got their own obviously definition, but yet
Yes.
we bring in all of these different modern tools to help us
Yeah.
be more efficient. And actually, sometimes it doesn't actually save us time because we're rushing on to the next thing. We're not actually
Oh,
thinking,
yeah.
oh, this saved me lots of time. Like
No.
I've ordered my food, like Deliveroo or a really nice healthy meal prep. I've saved all this beautiful time, but instead I'm going to choose to work instead of sit with my family or sit with myself and
Yeah.
listen to my boundaries.
Yes.
I think we're just getting carried away sometimes. And this is not just
So
my
true.
personal experience. This is like a lot of leaders that I work with and
Yeah.
speak to, they feel that same way. And parents, one of the biggest complaints all the time is like they don't have time for themselves. Have you come across that?
All the time. All the time. It's like when have I got time? Well, they don't have, yeah. There's
Yeah.
no time for themselves because especially working parents as well, working and then home. I mean, there's no time for them because at home it's obviously family life and then work it's work. So yeah, when do they have that time? But that's when the boundaries really do come into play.
Yep. How does a parent almost steal back pockets of time when they are in this kind of rat race between family and work?
Well, I think always like the first, of course, like everything, it's awareness, isn't it? Like how are they spending their time? And exactly what you were saying about priorities,
Mm.
you know, knowing what your priorities are. So first of all, how the first exercise we normally do is like, how are you spending your week? You know, like let's talk about that. So because sometimes we don't even realize we're spending so much time doing things that are not really serving us at all. So how are you spending your week? So really getting that awareness and what things do you maybe not need to do? Like what things are not priorities?
Yep.
Maybe taking their child somewhere at that particular time is not like a massive priority. So maybe we can change that, like making tiny, tiny adjustments.
Mm.
And then what could you do it for you in that time? You don't need to have hours and hours to
Yep.
feel better. Maybe it's just implementing or adding, an extra 10 minutes a day starting for
Yep.
yourself where you just do absolutely nothing. Or
Yep.
you have a phone call with your friend or whatever it is. So that's the first step, I think, is how are you spending your time? What can you eliminate from your timetable? Because I
No.
think sometimes, like you said, we're always trying to do everything, even if things happen faster than we expected. So we have a bit of free time, but then we just fill it with something else. But it's like, no, don't fill it with anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And we're so quick to fill it, aren't we? And one thing that we've done with one of the corporates that we've worked with here in Abu Dhabi is to help them ingrain some of the important well-being hacks, if you like, that just make these little things add up so they get the compound benefits of it. Is one of the things is around transitional time. So like you've just described, it's almost like finding those little moments and actually
Yes.
designing that. So, for example, in this company I'm thinking of, we had a space where it was almost like a quiet room where they could just go before they enter the day. They'll go there, park their cars or whatever before they have to come
Oh,
in and say
wow.
hello and everything else. They knew that they could go into this room, collect themselves, take 10 minutes, do whatever it is they needed to kind of do internally to come back to themselves, and then go into the work day. And the same on the way home as well. And obviously they can use that throughout the day for its purpose. But that those transitional moments, I think, can be
Wow.
extremely powerful. And it can almost like
Yeah.
just be like a valve releasing some of that extra pressure that's perhaps been built off, so that we're not kind of like running to the next one to the next one.
Exactly. And it gives you time, your body time to digest everything that's happened, maybe the meeting that you just had or something.
Yep.
You know, it just gives your mind and body time to process, digest, and then you're ready to make better decisions just for that 10-minute break.
Yep.
Instead of because nowadays I remember before back back then where a 10-minute break was a sort of 10-minute break. You would have a chat with your friends or whatever in the break room.
Yeah.
But now if you go somewhere and you watch people having the break, they're on the phones, there's actually no break.
Yep.
Yeah, there's no break. And it's like, when are you actually switching off? Because being on the phone, but I guess it's not really switching off, is it?
It depends on the individual, right? I think
Yeah,
because maybe they're
yeah,
looking at something that does energize them. But I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about as being connected with self. I think
yes,
if
yes.
I honestly think if we've got a device in front of us, we're not. Our attention is going outward. It's not going inward.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and it's not for everyone, right? Everyone's
No,
going to have their own thing. But I guess like what we want to encourage with a conversation like this is for anyone listening is to encourage people to do the thing they need, even if it's just like 2 minutes.
exactly. Because I've worked with parents and they say, there's nothing I can change, so they've already sort of
Mm.
given up of changing anything. My life's going to be like this for the next so many years because there's nothing I can change. But it's like, yeah, it's not always the big things that you can change. Like maybe the job you can't change now, or other things. But like you said, it's the small things we can change. But when you're in that state of overwhelm anyway and you're stressed, it is very hard to start to change, to see the small things you can change. Yeah, because I mean, I've been there, and I'm not a parent, but I've been there where I just thought, no, there's nothing else I can do. I have to get this done, and then I'll be okay. But then there's another thing, and then I'll be okay. When you're in that, you do need to intervene and break that pattern.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, classic pattern interrupt needed. And I think we in the workplaces we need that, right? We need to, because sometimes like the hamster wheel is going and everyone's doing the things that you normally do, but it doesn't always mean that that's creating
No.
good outcome,
Yes.
right? And that
Yeah.
the results the company wants and needs. It's
Exactly. And then you're talking to other people who are maybe going through the same thing. So you're both, which is great that you're talking about it because you don't want to feel completely alone. But I mean, talking about it may be a bit too much, like dwelling on it as well. So then you're both in this cycle of, oh yeah, it's never going to get better.
yeah.
You know, you can, talking is okay, but you've got to be productive afterwards as
Exactly.
well.
And it's funny because this is what
Bring
was coming
someone else.
to mind when I said earlier about like what kind of boundary would be perhaps
Oh,
an interesting
yeah.
idea for a leader. And I think to have some kind of almost like rules of engagement around
Yeah.
different kinds of communication. I think it's important to have like a door open policy to some extent, and that every employee feels safe to come to you. I think that's really, really important. But I do
Yeah.
think if you're clear with, hey, listen, when I come and see you and I'm in this part of the office, then it's fair game. You can talk to me about whatever you want. But if we're in this meeting room or if we're engaged
Yes.
in this particular
Yes.
with this agenda, I'm going to ask you please to just respect and focus on that. And then either 5 minutes
You're
before,
right.
5 minutes after, we can again
You're right.
have open floor to talk about whatever you want. It could be about tell me about your kids, it could be tell me about a problem, tell me about something that's going on in work. It
You're
can be
right.
absolutely anything. But I think
Yeah.
some kind of boundary around intentional time and intentional communication can be really, really powerful.
Exactly. And that has to happen actually, doesn't it? It has to happen. Otherwise it could go the other way. It could just, everybody's talking about everything all the time. I mean, no, you're right. In fact, that's probably the number one, isn't it? Boundaries and how we communicate. There has to be a time and the place, and you need that safe space. It has to be pre-planned, I think.
And I think there obviously are times of crisis when you might need to mention something that you wouldn't normally mention and things like that. But again, it can be done in a healthy way for everybody involved
Exactly.
if
Exactly.
the rules of engagement to some extent have been shared and everybody's clear on how we communicate around
Exactly.
certain issues.
Comes back to communication again. But like if they had access to these trainings, and there are moments in the training where it's like, what's going on in your life right now that you'd like to talk about, or the trainers can be
Yeah,
times for those things as well if they want to share in front of people. But a lot of
exactly.
people one-to-one.
And not everyone is equipped, right? And I think that's really important. I had
Yeah.
somebody share with me a little while back that they felt like they didn't have anyone to really speak to within their immediate network that was in their
Okay.
workplace, that was within their family, within their friendships, about some of the deeper things that he was experiencing. And I had to remind him that not everybody is like trained or built or has the capacity to be able to hold that kind of space. And I think
Yes.
sometimes there's a lot of judgment is, oh, well, I can't speak to that person because of X, Y, Z. But actually, if you think coaches, therapists, psychologists, we all have training that supports our skill set, that helps us to be that person for others, because it's not natural. You're not born with it. And I think sometimes
no, exactly. And you could get the wrong help, which
exactly. And some leaders, like, they get a real bad rap, right, for not being that person. But actually, like, do they have the skills? Like, they've been shown how to do that. Is it so there needs to be this like almost like level of understanding and acceptance that people are the way that they are. However, if we could all get on the same page and know where we're going and know that we're all going to need unique support, and perhaps there's going to be different vulnerable groups within a workplace, parents being one of them, is that we can start to facilitate what does that support look like. Because it might be that, you know, Joe Bloggs next door is not the person to speak to, but actually Alice over the road down the corridor, like, is the best person, you know. So it's really
exactly. And in my experience as well, like, you know, a lot of employees, they don't want to talk to anyone at work about anything. They do like the external people coming in, because, and I understand that as well, because maybe you don't want to share everything, even if your boss or whoever it is trained in this. You just sometimes you want to keep them separate, don't you?
Yep, exactly. But then keeping it separate, is that part of the problem of how we've got here? It's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think it's always going to be unique. Jasmine, you touched on something earlier. You mentioned parental burnout. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, what should I tell you? I mean, it's similar to being burnt out anyway, you know, just being overloaded and putting yourself last, you know, putting the needs of your family, maybe work, before your own needs. And I saw that quite a lot, especially, I don't know if it was, I think it was during COVID. There seemed to be a lot of parents suffering from burnout during that time. And I think it's probably because they were at home more, and maybe there was just no escape. That sounds quite bad, but do you know what I mean? There was no room for them. There was no time for them. And I think, and I think we all do. There are signs. Your body does give you signs when you're burning out, you know, but I think it's when you're in that trap again, like we said before. I just quickly do this. I just do that, like famous last words, until it's too late. And some people can end up, I was talking to parents who ended up in hospital 3 times, got burnt out 3 times. I was like, once wasn't enough, you know.
And that it's interesting that you say that as well, because I think that there are actually lots of different types of burnout, and
yes,
burnout
exactly,
is just one of them. So it's very common to see sometimes somebody experience occupational burnout, which is the classic burnout the World Health Organization have kind of coined, and that's they use to essentially diagnose the psychological issues there. But we have like digital burnout, we have
that's true.
just emotional burnout. Generally, we have physical burnout. There's so many different forms of it. I mean, there are like loads. And you can, and anyone listening that wants to learn more about that can go and listen to the Stress Relief in Your Pocket podcast, because we do lots of things around that. But I think sometimes we don't pay enough attention to parents in the workplace and the levels of burnout and how unique and the nuances that can be there for them that perhaps aren't there for someone else.
Definitely. And it's about speaking up, you know, using your voice to communicate the boundaries, maybe saying no. But the thing is, but if you leave it too long, where you're sort of in the burnout, then you really can't say no. Because you're in it, you don't even know what you're supposed to be saying yes to or no to. You know, you've gone so far. That's really hard. So like you were saying, it's really about listening to the early signs that your body tells us. But also, you know, what I found really interesting is a lot of the women, it was women actually mainly who I was working with, who suffered from burnout. You know, when we were talking about it, they realized that, and it happened with me as well, you know, they kept saying yes because they thought they weren't enough in the beginning. So it all came back to working on yourself, low self-esteem and all of this. So it's never really what's happening now, is it? It's what's happened and the behaviors we've learned from the past and all of this. So again, it's working on yourself. And
I truly believe that. I think there's And the topic of burnout is an interesting one, because a lot of people claim that they're burned out, and actually, if you're really burnt out, like, you wouldn't be claiming it like a badge of honor, you know. Like, a lot of people say they're burnt out when they're just tired, and I get that they're trying to articulate how they're feeling, but actually there's a big difference between somebody that's experiencing some momentary stress and intense bouts of stress, and whether that then becomes prolonged chronic stress, then leading into burnout. And I think, like you said, sometimes you don't know you're in it until you're in it, and you're too far down that rabbit hole. And that's a really, really tough place to be. But again, I think that's where a workplace has a responsibility to pick up on other people's red flags. I think there's a lot of onus put on the individual to look after themselves. And yes, I believe that we all need to take responsibility for ourselves. And we need to, I believe, we all need to go and do some inner work and really get to know ourselves and what makes us tick and all this kind of stuff. But I think, you know, we need others to have our back and to say, hey, Jasmine, Charlotte, your performance isn't being what it is, or you've just been a bit distant lately. Is everything okay? And maybe they haven't then realised that that's even what's going on. But as soon
because
as
once
you reflect it back, hello, okay, I can't ignore that anymore. Maybe I am feeling distant. What's going on, right? And then I can question it.
No, I love that. I think that's really, really important, because you could just lose yourself with the burnout, and just lose yourself and just, fade away into the background if nobody notices. But like you said, one conversation could just suddenly be the conversation that that person needs at that time. It's like, okay, it's like an intervention, isn't it? It's like, right, okay, I need to change something. Because if you're just by yourself, it's very difficult. No, it's conversations again, the right conversation.
100%. So the first time that I burned out, I was living here in Abu Dhabi. I was working for a big fitness chain at the time, doing their programming. So I was like flying to different places and stuff like this, like in the GCC. A lot of responsibility, a lot of work, but I absolutely loved it. But
that's the hard thing when you love it.
Yeah, I loved it, but at the same time, there was a lot of stuff from my kind of past, if you like, kind of coming up for me. Unresolved emotions, bit of a mismatch, or probably even lack of awareness of what I really truly valued at that time in my life and who I was. My own sense of identity was heavily tied to my job as well. And I know for parents, it's the same kind of thing. You lose your identity within your environment, the people around you. And for me, I am convinced if someone had took me aside out of their leadership team, took me aside and said, why are you working to this intensity? You know, I don't believe I was showing signs perhaps externally, other than working and loving it so much and being so excited by everything. But that's also extreme end of the spectrum, right? And I think if somebody had perhaps just paused and said why, you know, and just made sure I knew why, then maybe I wouldn't have spiraled in the way that I did. I don't know that for sure. Obviously, this is all hindsight, but I truly think that certain conversations we have with certain people at certain times, especially people that are in our kind of close proximity, that do see parts of us that perhaps we don't see for ourselves, can play a big role in our lives. And I think sometimes in a workplace, you know, just pausing to say, how are you? Like, is everything okay? Or like, what's going well for you? Why do you do what you do? And just get to know each other on that deeper level, like you said, because then you get to know yourself, right? And then that inner work also begins.
No, you trust. That's like what happened. Well, it's different what happened to me. Like I saw the signs coming. Like I saw the signs. There was lots of projects coming up. I was feeling really anxious, because I think anxiety can bring it on as well, can't it? When you're so like consumed with anxiety and working so much. I didn't have a day off, I didn't have anything. I could feel it coming. There was important projects coming up. I thought, I can't say no, I'll just do this. But my body was saying, stop now. But no, I didn't listen to and I knew I didn't listen to myself. It's my own fault, really. Carried on. And I remember I couldn't sleep. I was waking up in the night, you know, when you're just thinking about a billion things at the same time. So many thoughts. I couldn't, there was just too many things to do. And then I don't know what happened, but I carried on, because I thought I'd just carry on. And then one morning I woke up and I thought I was having a heart attack. That's how it happened with me. I couldn't get up. I just couldn't get up. Have you ever had that? I was just laying like that. It was like, you are not getting up. I was like, I have to stop. Now my body's saying you have to rest. So I stayed in bed for like 3 days. It took me about 6 weeks. So it was burnout, and everyone was like, oh, you need to go to doctors. I was like, no, I don't. I just need to stop. I couldn't even handle going to doctors. And I couldn't even have a conversation, Charlotte. Like my brain I couldn't cope with a conversation. But then I was okay. But that was a massive lesson. I was like, wow.
It's funny because the first sign or the first step on burnout recovery is to own it and acknowledge it and accept that this is happening. And I think that is the most important thing, right? Whether it's our body that tells us, our mind that tells us, because it goes to dark places. I think as soon as we can acknowledge, okay, maybe I'm not superhuman anymore, then we can do that next step, to have the conversation, go to a doctor, drink enough water that you actually need, something really basic. But we can't do that until we actually acknowledge it, which is why we push more and more and more beyond our limit, even though we're not getting anywhere. We just do that because we're in denial, and it's easier to say
I see what you mean.
Easier to stay in that state than it is to change anything.
Yeah. But it was funny because when I did eventually go back into work and I wasn't well at all, like I said, look, I'm really sorry. I burnt myself out. It's stupid, But nobody could tell, they didn't really believe me. But luckily, I knew what was going on. But yeah. So like you said, and that's why what you said, I think is really important, the people around you. Because if I had had people around me saying, Jasmine, we understand or something, I don't know, that validation and acknowledgement would have been nice, but yeah.
It's that connection, isn't it? And we all need connection. It's one of our basic psychological needs. And if we're not feeling like we're connected to the people that we work with, and in a professional capacity, but we still need to feel seen and heard and understood. One thing that's interesting to bring up around burnout, so for me, one of the triggers was actually inside the workplace, but it was not the intensity of work. It was actually some of the office politics that was going on.
Oh, really?
And that started to trigger some kind of emotional responses in me from my past. And I did not know this at the time at all. It ended up being this whole accumulation of everything, just kind of almost like collapsing in on me, like physically, mentally, and emotionally. But it was the office politics and a lot of the confrontations that were happening, not even with me, but that was happening around me. And that certain behaviors that people would have that perhaps weren't so professional and nipping off to do things that perhaps they shouldn't be doing and things like that. Like it started to really like reflect back things to me that I hadn't dealt with from what I'd witnessed growing up. And I think in the workplace, we do not take into account our individual experiences and then the impact that can have when you're surrounded by so many other people. It's it really goes overlooked, I think.
Yeah, no, that's huge. Again, at least it comes back to working on yourself, and we do have that responsibility, but we all have that responsibility for ourselves, us in a team. And it's not easy, but I think it's just important to start something. Yeah.
It's interesting. We so for our listeners that might not know this, Jasmine and I did a podcast episode on our other podcast, the Stress Relief in Your Pocket one, and we ended up getting onto the topic of self-parenting. And it's interesting because now I feel like that concept is perhaps coming over into the workplace through this conversation. And the idea of self-parenting is that we do almost like take ourselves by the hand and like walk ourselves through, okay, what do we need? Like what is happening with us in the workplace? What is happening with us in general?
Yes.
It's an interesting one.
Definitely, but we need access to know that to start with, don't we? Because how would you even know that if you're not in the mental health sector?
Exactly. And we want to make sure that, the work that both you and I do is more about prevention, right? Rather than cure.
Exactly.
Yes, we're there in times of crisis and we're there to help people almost like kind of come back from challenging times. But I think ultimately we want to stop people from getting to those points that we've just described that we've experienced and what I know other listeners would have experienced on their own ways. And
going over your limit, basically. Yeah. That's one way.
But the way we prevent it is by taking a risk and bringing somebody external in that has got this skill set, whether it's you, I, somebody else, it doesn't matter. As long as somebody is initiating and provoking these thoughts and these ideas within the workspace, it can really start to evolve into a sufficient program or a plan or something that you really need to be able to support vulnerable groups, particularly parents in this scenario.
Exactly. You said it.
So Jasmine, tell me, what do you think that organizations can do aside from the communication piece? What else do you think they could do to support parents more efficiently?
A very good question. I mean, well, I think it is communication. I know we've said that, but because maybe some organizations, they might not know exactly what parents need, because all of our needs could be different. Yeah, there's some similarities, but there could be some differences as well. So letting parents, ask what they need, so it does start again with the conversation, communication, because giving parents the space to say, look, is it okay that I request this, please? So it is listening to their employees, giving them the space to listen. Of course, the training, the communication, but really listening. Could be anonymous as well, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting to ask the question, what makes your life as a parent hard for you in this organization? Because the minute you know that, all you need to then do is the opposite.
True. Yeah. What could we do to make, what could we do to make your life easier?
Exactly.
And more productive at work?
Exactly.
So ask them. Exactly. Simple, just ask.
And a lot of the common answers are more money, more time off. And that's what the leaders don't want to hear.
Exactly. But no quick fixes. There are no quick fixes. It's not going to be like all of that money, all of that time is not going to solve everything. Because if you're still using habits that are not serving you, it doesn't matter how much time you have or how much money you've got, you're not going to manage it in a way that helps you.
Exactly.
You hear that all the time, don't you? If only I had more money, it's like, no, you need to manage what you have first.
Exactly. And also, again, take that conversation to a deeper layer. Don't just accept that they want time and money and write that down in your little notepad and then walk away. It's like, okay, why? What's that going to allow for you? What do we already have in play that could help us manage?
And I really think it is at the end of it all, if you really, really want to make a change in your life, it is about facing uncomfortable fears. Like, there's no quick, easy way, is there? Do you think? Like, if you're really serious about changing your life, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be challenges, and it's always difficult, right? It's uncomfortable when you get into new habits. And I think that's one of the things that perhaps a lot of workplaces and organizations struggle with, because they've always known it to be a certain way, and it is a risk to change things. And the bigger the company, the bigger the risk. If they look at a policy like a childcare policy, what impact does that then have on everybody else that doesn't have kids, right? There is a lot of components that need to be considered. However,
true.
by ignoring them isn't going to make it better.
Exactly. That's a decision in itself, isn't it? And that's all going to have consequences.
Yeah.
I think it's move, isn't it? Do something differently, but it's important to keep moving.
Yep. And like you said, it's do an intro workshop and see what comes up. Maybe that is
exactly
what guys need, but we'll find out, right?
Yeah. Because I've spoken to heads of corporates and things, and they're like, but we just don't know where to start. So then they don't do anything. I'm like, well, you don't have to figure it all out now. Let's start with, like you said, an intro workshop. We can get some feedback. We can see what problems are coming up, and then we know how to address it. It's like, it's not about changing and fixing everything all at once, because when you have that mentality, you do get stuck because it's overwhelming.
Exactly. I think it was Rumi that said, when you start to walk on the path will appear. And I think it's so relevant to this conversation, because like you said really, really well, is by taking no decision is a decision in itself, and that is having a knock-on effect on the well-being of parents in the workplace and everybody in the workplace, but particularly parents.
I think so. But you think it's easier for the moment, don't you, to bury your head in the sand?
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's not the way forward. It's not the way forward. It's not how we're going to thrive, is it, in the workplace? So What could someone do other than start the conversation with employees and perhaps with experts like you in this field
I
of
think so. Yeah, you
parenting?
can't do it all by yourself. Yeah, you need to find other people to
Yeah.
support and help you share knowledge. Yeah.
What else could someone do that's listening to this that is responsible for the well-being of their organization? What else could they do? What else would be an option as a starting point?
Well, I think for them, I think it'll be important. I think it'll be really beneficial if they know, like the power of, I don't know, therapy or coaching. Maybe if they could get themselves a coach and work with a coach themselves. I know that's probably not the answer that you were thinking I was going to say, but I didn't think I was going to say that either. But I think for them to, see the value
Yep.
of being self-aware and
Yep.
how that can really make positive changes for you first.
Yep.
Because if you believe in it,
Yep.
then you're going to communicate that in a different way, aren't you? Because if you just think, oh, this is something we need to do, let's just tick this box,
Yep.
and you're not really on board with it, then that's going to transpire to the rest of the employees. So I think, yeah, work on yourself first. That, for me, I think that's would be the best option.
Yep.
That's what helped me.
Yep.
Doing it myself first. Yeah.
That's what we've seen when it comes to working with C-suites through coaching. That's how the wellness theory ended up working with corporates in the way that we do, is because they got great results. It was like, now can you come do this with our team? And that was how we kind of entered into this space, aside from the odd workshop that we would do here and there. That was how we got in, and so I truly believe that. I think it's tricky to tell anyone that they need coaching if they don't see that there's.
I know, but we always say nobody needs coaching. But we all deserve coaching.
Yeah, there you go. Yep, definitely true story. And there's a big thing right around coaching that you only have it if there's a problem. Actually, look at the highest performers in history. They all have a coach or multiple coaches. Look at any athlete that exists. They have multiple coaches in different things just for them to get good at one thing. So anyone listening to this, I would get you to grab a pen and paper and just write down who is your team, who is your support, like as in who are your coaches, who are the people that are pushing you to do better, to be better, to learn more, right? And also who is there reminding you of that you're already enough as you are, but this will just give you that extra edge, and this is what's going to bring perhaps a bit more joy to what you do and a bit more impact. I think it's a really powerful exercise.
It doesn't make you weak if you see a coach. So I hear that a lot. Oh, but it looks like I'm weak. It's like, no, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I think the narrative around coaching is definitely changing. I mean, you can see, right, in the last like 3 or 4 years, coaching has boomed in the UAE in particular. I mean, it's boomed worldwide. It's over, I think, $1 trillion industry now, coaching. It's insane. And I remember like 10 years ago that I knew probably like 5 other coaches in the region.
Wow.
Now every other person's brother and sister are a coach. So I think it's really important for anyone listening is to do your due diligence and really think about, okay, what do I need as a professional? What do I need personally? Is there some overlap between the two? And how can me perhaps working on this help support those people that I'm around? And obviously, we've focused a lot on parenting for today's conversation, but like you said earlier, we are role modeling all of the time, right? You are a role model for everybody around you, and you are modeling other people completely unconsciously. So it's time to perhaps, take responsibility for that.
And be conscious. Exactly. It's all about being conscious, isn't it?
It is. Jasmine, is there anything else you want to bring to the workplace wellbeing conversation before we wrap up and I'll ask my final question?
No, I just want to say that, if anybody is struggling, if they're a parent or not a parent, I think for me, the important thing, and when I work with clients as well, this comes up, it's just, they think, are you I hope you're not feeling that you've done something wrong or you're wrong. Because I hear this quite a lot. And even with myself, it was like, I'm wrong. Everything I'm doing is wrong. That feeling of just being wrong and it's all your fault. Like you've got yourself in that situation. And it's like, I just want to say that it's very normal to be in this situation. Actually, you know, we're human and this happens, but there's always a way out. There is always a way out, even if you can't see it. But just be brave and have that conversation. That's the first step.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Yeah, for sure. Self-blame, self-judgment, it really doesn't get us anywhere, not in the long term anyway. It might get us like to maybe like the next step, right? It might have enough fuel and energy behind it, but coming from a place of running away from something rather than, no, I'm going to run towards something better.
And it can be, sorry, Charlotte, and it can be so familiar that it's just so comfortable, you know?
Exactly. Okay, Jasmine, we could talk about all this all day long, this personal development road, but we won't for the sake of our listeners today and their time. So for every listen this podcast gets, a donation is made towards one of the 2030 sustainable goals. And you have chosen to support the goal number 6, which is all about clean water and sanitation. So why is this goal so important to you? When we zoom out of the workplace and we just look at the bigger picture of the world and the fact that we want to keep it and we want it to be sustained and for future generations, why is clean water and sanitation so important to you?
Well, I think that's the first. I mean, without that, you know, sorry, my answer is going to be quite simple, but without that, I feel like that is the basics, the absolute basics. You know, if you don't have clean water and sanitation, I mean, where are we without that? So that's why I just thought this is the absolute minimum.
Yeah. Without that, we don't have health, do we?
Exactly. There's nothing. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that has to be
the one.
A basic need. Yeah.
Amazing. Awesome. I would like to throw that in there, really, because sometimes it's easy to get stuck in the day-to-day topics and things, and sometimes we can forget these other things that are really, really important for all of our futures, you know. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom today. Jasmine, where can our listeners find you? I know you're big on LinkedIn. I think is probably your favorite place to be social media.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Jasmine Navarro, LinkedIn, and Withnava, Withnava, Instagram, and withnava.com website.
Amazing. All those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today's episode was hosted by myself, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, the co-founder of The Wellness Theory. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and share with someone who may benefit and be part of our mission to help people realise when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. I just wanted to share some more about our partner, B1G1. B1G1 is a global movement that enables businesses to incorporate effective impact creation into their everyday activities in a simple and powerful way. Through B1G1, businesses can choose from a wide range of verified projects around the world and integrate these impacts into their business operations. The core concept of B1G1 is that every business transaction or interaction can be directly linked to making a positive impact in our world, whether it's providing access to clean water, supporting education, planting trees, or addressing social issues. B1G1 enables businesses of all types to make a real difference. To find out more about them, visit their website at b1g1.com. Until next time, be well, mean well, and make a difference that lasts. See you in the next episode.